Bowhunting 360 is all about providing new bow owners important information that makes it easy to get started. We asked you for your bow hunting questions on Instagram, and today we're going to be answering them in this video. And then there's bonus questions and answers in an article. If you click the link in the description, it'll take you to that article. One of the questions we received is, how much draw weight do you need to effectively bow hunt? Now that's a great question, and I'm going to do my best to answer that. So the first thing you need to look at is every state has different hunting regulations. So take a look at your state's hunting regulations and see if they specify a minimum draw weight. Some states do, some states don't, and the minimum draw weights vary by state. So just make sure that you're over the minimum if there is one. Second thing you need to look at is your complete bow setup. Draw weight is just one factor in a lethal hunting setup. Other factors you need to consider is your draw length, which is how far you pull back the bow. And that matters because, let's say we have two people with the exact same bow setup. The only difference is their draw length. The person with the longer draw length is going to shoot a faster arrow than the person with a shorter draw length. So if you have a shorter draw length, you might need to pull a little bit more draw weight or look at a more efficient bow to become lethal. And of course our goal, as far as we measure lethality based on if that arrow is able to pass completely through the animal we're hunting, whatever that animal may be. And that brings me to bow design. Bow design is another thing to consider. Obviously recurves and longbows don't shoot as quickly as their compound counterparts. So if you're shooting a pretty low draw weight, let's say under 40 pounds, maybe a compound is a better option. And then not all compounds are created equal. Bows that have a lot of adjustment are really great for beginners, but they're not as efficient as those that are made for specific draw lengths. So a lot of manufacturers make short draw bows, and those are great for people with short draw lengths. It gets the most out of their draw length and creates a very efficient and fast shooting setup. And the other thing we need to look at is arrow weight. A heavier arrow will penetrate better than a lighter one. So, again, if you're on the lighter side of draw weight or a shorter draw length, a heavier arrow will help you get more penetration. And I know I talked a little bit about arrow speed, but arrow speed is not exactly what we're looking for. We're just looking for energy transferred to the arrow. So a heavy arrow will shoot slower, which means that your pin gaps will be longer, but they penetrate much better. And that's another thing to consider is your shot distance. So again, if you're on that lower side or a shorter draw length, pulling a lighter draw weight, consider bringing your shot distance in, even inside of 20 yards, and keep 20 yards as your maximum. That way, you're not losing a lot of arrow speed as that arrow gets farther from you. Broadhead design is another factor to consider. A fixed blade broadhead, especially a very simple 2-blade broadhead like this one that I'm using on my traditional bow, is an excellent option for lower draw weights, short draw lengths. If you're shooting 50-pound efficient compound bow with a draw length that's greater than 27 inches, you can shoot whatever you want. You still want to keep in mind that a heavier arrow is still a good idea. Let's say 400 grains or more of arrow weight is probably a good idea, no matter who you are. But really, 50 pounds and up with today's compound bows, you're good to go on just about any big game animal. We want to always pull as much draw weight as we physically can, but we don't want to get overbowed where that hurts our ability to effectively pull that bow back in a hunting situation and hurts our accuracy, because shot placement is the most important factor in a archery setup's lethality. If you need more information on shot placement, we have a couple videos on that, so we won't get too deep into that, but shot placement is very, very important. And one thing I did want to touch on really quick on shot placement is if you are shooting a lower draw weight, short draw length setup, shot placement and limiting the type of shots that you take is another consideration. You know, if you stick to just broadside shots that are close, you shouldn't have any problems. When you get into steep quartering shots, that requires that arrow pass through more tissue, and it becomes harder with those more marginal hunting setups. Draw weight. Now, there's a few ways to test if you are overbowed, meaning you're pulling too much draw weight. The first is to just hold your bow straight out and see if you can draw it very smoothly back to your anchor point. If you can do that without any big herky-jerky motions, then you're good to go. Another test is to sit on the ground and draw your bow in a similar manner without a lot of extra movement. That's another great test to see if you're overbowed. It's also pretty easy to build up the strength to increase your draw weight. If you're at 30 pounds now, in a couple months from now, you can, if you're shooting compound bow, you can crank those limbs into 40 pounds in a couple months if you keep up with your shooting every day and do some exercising. The next question we're going to answer is, how far can you effectively shoot a white-tailed deer with archery equipment? Again, it's a great question and a complicated one to answer. The reason is, it depends a lot on the individual. But something that you want to keep in mind is the fact that when we're in the backyard practicing or at the archery range, it's a very different situation than when we're bow hunting and shooting at a live animal. Here, we're very relaxed, and it's easy to shoot well under these conditions when there's really no pressure. But when we're bow hunting, there's a lot of factors that come into play. Maybe we've been sitting for 3, 4, 5 hours without moving, so our muscles are pretty tight. Again, we are shooting at a live animal that maybe it's moving, and we have a lot of adrenaline going through our minds, a lot of things to consider. We're trying to factor in, we're trying to calculate the distance, our shot placement, the angle, all that stuff is running through our mind when we're trying to make that shot. When I'm determining my maximum effective range, what I like to do is I like to think about the range that I'm 100% confident in, that I can place that arrow every single time into the kill zone of a deer. Let's say like a 6-inch circle. So whatever that maximum distance is, that every time I go to the range, every time I shoot, 100% of the time I know I can place an arrow into that spot. That's my maximum distance, whatever that might be. And it might change throughout the hunting season. Usually throughout the hunting season, you get busy hunting, so you don't practice as much, so you might need to bring that shot distance in a little bit as you get caught up, or maybe you're just going through a rough shooting spell and you need to bring your maximum distance from 30 yards to 25 yards. It happens to everyone. So these are things to keep in mind, and these animals deserve our respect. They deserve this attention to detail, and it's a really important thing to consider and think about before you go hunting. The final question we're going to answer is, what are your best tips for a first-time tree stand hunter? So this is your first time hunting out of a tree stand. There's a few things you need to keep in mind. First, in relation to gear, you want to make sure that you have a quality tree stand, a comfortable safety harness. You want to make sure that you have a lifeline. Other than that, a bow hanger is really, really handy to have when you're in the tree, just someplace where you can hang your backpack and your bow. Once you have your gear squared away, you want to make sure that you're comfortable using that equipment. What I like to recommend is that people, if you're using, especially if you're using a hang-on or a climbing tree stand, set it up just a few feet off the ground. Practice getting in and out of your tree stand, setting it up, that type of stuff. Just get comfortable using your tree stand, at a safe distance, just literally a foot off the ground. Once you're there and you're comfortable, setting up your tree stand, that's when you can start practicing shooting out of that tree stand. Shooting from an elevated platform versus on the ground is very different. We have a complete video on that right on the Bowhunting 360 YouTube that explains how to shoot out of a tree stand. So once you have the gear, once you're comfortable using that gear, and you've practiced shooting out of your tree stand, you're ready to hunt. And remember, when you're hunting out of a tree stand, just because you're in the tree stand high up, it doesn't mean that deer can't see you. So sit still, don't make a lot of extra movement when you're hunting, and then relax and have fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this Q&A session. We do them every month on Instagram, so be sure to follow us on there and watch our stories and send us your questions.